Welcome. Today we're covering the chemistry of life second half of the unit. We're focusing on organic molecules. The big picture, the big unit idea, there's just one in this half of the unit, is that we should be able to use evidence to explain how carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and some other specific elements, form the four major organic molecules. So if you remember, we talked about CHON, P, and S, chomps. Those are the ones we're talking about. In order to reach that, we're going to have 3 lesson targets, and you should be able to see that these 3 lesson targets are pretty much going to be the same, for the most part, for all of the lessons within this half of the unit. You're going to need to understand the characteristics of organic compounds, and we talked about that a little bit in the last half of the unit. We're going to recognize that organic compounds contain carbon, and carbon is the building blocks, carbon atoms are the building blocks of essential molecules. And then we're going to discuss that trace elements are found within some organic compounds. So I am expecting that you're going to be following along this presentation using the guided notes that I provided for you in the course content under I think it was 2B.01. Okay, so it's 2B.01. So this is the second half of Unit 2. There's a link in here. I'll talk to you about that in a minute, but it's from the Amoeba Sisters. Feel free to watch that video. It is required and it's in your content as well. So here's your big idea and lesson targets. And then remember, for guided notes, all I'm expecting is that you fill in the parts that are missing. So we're going to get into what's called macromolecules. You're going to fill in this part that's missing. I provided you the illustrations for each of these so that you don't have to draw them all. But there are some parts you have to write more of than others. So feel free to pause the video at any time. There will be these guided notes for every lesson, and at least that's my goal. So today, for this video, I'm only going to be able to cover simple carbohydrates, and we're going to end before we get to complex carbohydrates. So this is where you'll pick up in the second video, which is going to be linked in your content as well for this module. So we'll end here where you see these blue models. All right, let's get in. Macromolecules are just large, macro means large, so complex molecules that are necessary for life. And they are in specific carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, which is another word for fats, and nucleic acids, which is what we're going to use to make genetic information like your DNA. Carbohydrates are the primary fuel for running all the cellular processes and machinery, and it's part of your cellular structure. Not just your cellular structure, but plants and insects as well. Excuse me. So there's 2 types of carbohydrates. There are simple carbohydrates, which I've illustrated with this little pile of bricks, Lego bricks. And then whatever you make from these Lego bricks are going to be the complex carbohydrates. There's lots of those. So we're going to talk about 3 kinds of complex carbohydrates in this lesson alone. But on the molecular level, individual molecules can be strung together to form large molecules, and that's macromolecules. Simple carbohydrates are always made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Those 3 elements from the periodic table, they're always in a 1:2:1 ratio. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to tell you. It's always 1 carbon to 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. So for example, if you look at glucose, the chemical structure for glucose is C6H12O6. So 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens for glucose. So that is the chemical formula for glucose. So if you can tell, it's a 6:12:6 or 1:2:1 ratio if you simplify it. And I'll even show you that when we look at this molecule. There's supposed to be 6 atoms of carbon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 12 atoms of hydrogen. 1 plus these 2 is 3. So 3 up here. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then 6 atoms of oxygen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 1 in the ring makes 6. So 6, 12, 6, that's true. All All right, so every time a carbohydrate is formed, it has to follow the 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So what if I said we're going to make a carbon that has 12 carbon in the hydrocarbon ring? How many other hydrogens and oxygens would there be if there were 12 carbons? These molecules can get quite large because they have to be multiples of 6, right? You can't have a half of a carbon, half of a glucose. That's the smallest one. So what is a multiple of 12? What is the multiple of 12 that hydrogen would be if it's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio? Should come up with 24, because 12 times 2 is 24, and then oxygen would be the same as the carbon, so it should be 12. So 12 to 24 to 12 is still 1 to 2 to 1, just like the other one. So every time you see a carbohydrate, you're going to have to know how many hydrogens and oxygens are in there. Simple carbohydrates are divided into 2 groups. So this is the part that you need to write down on your notes. Mono meaning 1, di meaning 2, so monosaccharides. Saccharide is the word for sugar. So one saccharide means there's one geometric shape, and disaccharides means there's 2 geometric shapes, and they're covalently bonded in the middle. In order to get them to bond, they have to remove the chemical reaction removes a water molecule from between these 2 atoms, or I should say molecules, and it sticks together with the oxygen in the middle. So again, to make a disaccharide or a polysaccharide, every time they're linked together, a water molecule is removed. So to make it, synthesize it, they call it dehydration, to remove a water, dehydration synthesis. All right, so just to reiterate, monosaccharides are the building blocks of more complex carbohydrates because they're a single sugar molecule. So here's an example: glucose, C6H12O6, and fructose, C6H12O6. Wait a minute, they have the same chemical formula? Does that mean they're the same molecule and substance? No, that's the kicker. You'll learn more about this in chem. But even though they have the same ratio, and in this case it's the most simple, 6 to 12 to 6, fructose is found in fructose, and glucose is found in grains. So when you see these 2 side by side, if you counted the carbons, the oxygens, and the hydrogens, you'd still count 6 carbons, 6 oxygens, and 12 hydrogens in each one, but their 3-dimensional structure is different. So you can see here, look, this is a hexagon, it's got 6 sides, and this is a pentagon, it's only got 5, but there's still the same number because it just has a tail on it. So 3-dimensionally, it's a different structure. And because its structure is different, its function is different. How many times are we going to say that in biology, right? There are 2 other important places we'll find mono or single saccharides. We're going to talk about these more later in our whole separate section of this unit called nucleic acids, but DNA, I'm sure you've heard of it, and RNA, which are the genetic material in our bodies, have a sugar in their 3-dimensional molecular structure. So here they are, here's DNA and here's RNA, and I'm wondering if at this point you could pick out the part of this that is the sugar. So we talk about these later as a house with a flag and a balloon. Here's another house with a flag and a balloon. So I'm wondering if you were able to tell the difference between, or I should say, if you could identify which of these 3 structures is the sugar. At this point, you should be looking at the 3-dimensional penta or hexagon. So this blue structure in the middle. So again, mono plus mono is di, or 1 plus 1 is 2. Sucrose is the chemical name for table sugar, and lactose is the chemical name for milk sugar. Not all milk is protein. There's a sugar in there as well. And so again, in order to make this, if you could see this chemically, there's an OH here and an OH here. So when these 2 form together, when they bind, you're going to lose 1 oxygen and 2 of the hydrogens, and all you're left with is an oxygen in the middle. So when I say dehydration synthesis, that's because you're dehydrating, you're removing an water and you're synthesizing, you're sticking them together. So dehydration synthesis is how we link them apart. The body breaks these down into the individual monomers to further break it down into ATP and energy, which we're going to talk about next. So again, mono, di, poly. One, two, many. Okay, so just to recap here a little bit, simple carbs are a quick release of energy. Think about candy, think about sugar. If I were running a marathon, when I'm like 13 hours into this marathon, I'm tired. I need something quick to get my energy up. Marathon runners often have these like gel packs. Oh, this is just peanut butter, but it looks like this, and they're gooey, and they just rip open and they squirt it in their mouth. And because it's like a syrup and a gel, it's a quick dissolving, quick broken down, provides them with sugar right away, and the sugar provides them with the energy. The complex or poly carbohydrates or saccharides, complex carbohydrates or polysaccharides, gives a slower release of energy. So if you've ever heard of somebody who's carbo loading, if they're going to run a track meet or something, they want to have a bunch of spaghetti the night before, they're going to wake up and have bagels, and something that's going to have a slower release of energy, or oatmeal, for example. So many sugars are linked together for poly, and the basic word for sugar we use is glucose, okay? And that's the key molecule in delivering energy to the cell. So I want you to take a minute and go over this pulse check for yourself. Pause the video, make sure you're comfortable and you can understand or answer all of these, and we'll talk about them at some point to review. Now that you've had a chance to pause the video, just check in with yourself about these 3 lesson targets from learning targets from the lesson, and make sure that you could answer all of them correctly on a test or an assessment. That's all I have. I'll see you tomorrow.